Guys, today we've got the brand new Rlaarlo MK-07 on the bench, and I'm super excited to check this thing out because this is the most beautiful RC car I've personally ever owned. Today we're going to be tearing into this thing, seeing how everything works, then taking it out for a blast. Now this is a big 1/7 scale crawler. You can see how this thing compares to a 1/8 scale crawler. It's a lot longer, a lot taller, a bit wider, and it's actually a lot heavier. To take a good look at this thing, let's go ahead and get the body off the chassis. To do that, we've just got two body clips, one here and one here, and then the body just hinges open. Now this hinging mechanism reveals one of the concerns that I have. When you open it, it puts a lot of pressure on the back of this body, and there's no real positive stop for it, and I'm concerned that over time it's going to end up damaging this area back here. To completely remove the body, it looks like we take these three screws off, and then we need to disconnect these lights. Don't worry, we'll be looking at these lights in detail later. Unfortunately, I do also have to clip these cable ties. Fortunately, you normally won't have to do this because you won't have to take this body off. Now, there are only two wires that are going from the chassis to the body. One of them unplugs right here. Unfortunately, the other one goes all the way up to the front of the body up here. So instead of taking it apart up here, I think we're going to be better off taking it out from the radio box, which gives us an opportunity to see what's going on inside here anyway. Now, whereas taking all of this apart isn't the end of the world, I really would have liked to have seen a bit more thought put into this. A couple of quick disconnects right at the back of the body would have solved this problem. That being said, we'll just disconnect this connector here, and then of course, we're gonna have to take all of these zip ties off. It looks like whereas they were originally possibly planning on making this a waterproof receiver box, there's no seal here, so this is definitely not going to be water resistant. And there we go, that's the wiring out of the way. Now that does seem like a very silly amount of work you have to do in order to get this body off, when they could have just put a connector here for that wiring. Now we can get a closer look at this body. We can see this is a polycarbonate body. Underneath, it has a half interior and all the wiring for the lighting, as well as a shell underneath this interior and a whole bunch of hard parts. We've got hard fender flares, door handles, mirrors, this really nice roof rack that integrates with the inside cage, some scale detail in the back and in the front, and overall, this is a really cool looking body. All that scale detail does come with a weight penalty though. This entire truck, as you can see here, weighs 14 pounds. That's almost double the weight of a standard 1/8 scale crawler. Whether or not that weight really impacts performance is something we're gonna find out here in just a few minutes. But as you can see here, this body weighs about 3.5 pounds. But the bulk of the weight's coming from this chassis, and this is a beautiful chassis. We've got CNC machined aluminum chassis rails, a big beefy motor we're gonna be taking a closer look at soon. This comes with either a brushed or brushless system. I've got the brushed system here, and you can see that brushed ESC that goes along with it. Hiding behind that, you can see one of the servos. This thing has 5 servos total, 1 big steering servo, and then 4 servos that control the transmission and axles. Underneath, we've got a steel 4-link suspension in the rear, and a 3-link with panhard bar in the front. And you can also see these all steel drive shafts, which look really, really nice. This thing's running portal axles front and rear. Those portal axles are going to be turning some 2.6-inch beadlock wheels that run these tires that look fairly familiar to me. Let's pull one of these tires off and take a closer look at it. I'm a little concerned about these wheels and tires because they are a pretty non-standard size. You've got the normal 2.2s that come on 1/8 scale trucks, and then there are quite a few options for the SCX6, but those are going to be a bit bigger than these are as well. Pulling these off, we can see we've got aluminum 17mm hexes on here, but we don't have the standard 17mm stub axles, which leaves a pretty odd design here. Fortunately, I know another manufacturer that's doing something pretty similar to this. I'm hoping we've got some options for wheels and tires. We'll be checking that out later. Now, these tires are about 5.5 to 5.75 inches in diameter and about 2 inches wide. They feel medium soft. I think these will be great for trail riding and light rock crawling. As you can see, it appears these are genuine beadlocks, but let's make sure. I don't want to take this thing all the way apart, and for people who have messed with beadlocks before, you'll know exactly why, but yes, this definitely is a beadlock wheel and tire. We can get a closer look at these shock absorbers, and you can see that these are some serious big bore, all aluminum threaded body shocks, and they look really, really nice. Now I want to take a closer look at one of these portals, so let's get it off the truck. So far I have to say I'm pretty impressed with how this thing is built. It looks like they put a lot of time and effort into making this a good design and making it a strong design. Oh, well, we've got this shock off. Let's take a closer look at it. We can see that the bottom shock perch is held on with a screw, so that won't be falling off. We've got a very thick shock shaft, an aluminum shock body with aluminum shock collar, and then a composite aluminum and plastic shock cap. This is actually a really nice design and has plenty of strength while having a little bit of flex here at the top to prevent the shock cap from breaking. Fluid inside feels pretty thin. We'll have to see just how appropriate that is for the kind of bashing we're going to be doing. But overall, I think this feels really, really high quality and nice. And here we can see that portal axle. This thing has got some serious beef to it, as does this center drive shaft. This is a very strong looking center drive shaft. We can see we've got the cable for the locker going into the front, which is actually fairly unusual. Most of these crawlers will have the cable going into the back, so I'm interested to see what that mechanism is inside. All right, we should be able to pull this cover off now. And here's our first look inside. This thing looks pretty nice. We can see we've got a steel locker selector fork here, and then a very familiar looking locker. Basically, all this does is when it's engaged, this will push in and it will lock this axle shaft to the differential, bypassing the internals of the differential. I'm really curious to see if this is a fluid-filled or grease-filled differential. So let's get these portals out, get the axles out, and take a closer look at it. You can see these portal gears look pretty beefy, although they definitely are going to be sintered steel and not CNC machined steel. Should be able to just pull the axle shaft straight out. And these are definitely some thick, beefy axle shafts. And with that, the differential should be free. There we go. And now we can get a better look at how that locker works. This is the locking mechanism, and basically it just sits on the drive shaft, and when it's disengaged, the drive shaft is able to spin the internal differential gears, but when you engage it, it locks into the differential, locking that shaft to the differential, which essentially locks out those internal differential gears. Pretty simple operation, and that's how most of these work. Found something else I definitely don't like. These screws are 1.5 millimeter. 1.5 millimeter screws belong nowhere near an RC car this big. I'm not saying it's gonna be a strength problem, it's just you shouldn't need to use such a small bit on such a large truck. Okay, so we can see here that these are definitely all sintered steel gears, and we do not have any kind of sealing in here, which means this is going to be only a grease-filled differential. That's a little bit of a bummer because we do have O-rings on the side gears, so really all you would need to do is have a gasket here, and then you could turn this into a sealed differential. Unfortunately, adding a gasket can be a challenge because when you add a gasket, you're actually changing the relationship between the internal gears and moving the ring gear further away from the pinion gear. Whether or not that would actually be a problem, I'm not sure. This differential looks fairly similar in size to a 6S Arma, maybe just a little bit smaller, which should be fine for handling the stock power. But you know we don't like keeping things stock on this channel, so let me know in the comments if you want to see me put 6S on this in the next video. Before we dig into this transmission, I want to take a closer look at the steering system because it's pretty cool. First of all, we've got a nice high clearance drag link, and then you can see we've got this servo saver that's built directly into the tie rod, which should give us more reliable steering action than a servo saver that's right here on the servo itself, and should help protect the servo more than having none at all. We're going to take a closer look at this servo in a few minutes, but before we do that, I want to dig into this transmission. You can see right here, this is the adjustment nut for the slipper clutch, which means it's easily adjustable without taking anything apart. Unfortunately, I don't think we can say the same thing for this motor. By the way, this is a big beefy motor that appears to have replaceable brushes and is definitely a step above the standard brush motor that you would see. However, it's mounted by this screw here and this screw up here, and whereas I think we could get to this screw, I don't think we're easily going to be able to get to this screw without taking the entire power module out. So replacing this motor or adjusting gears is probably going to require the removal of this entire center module. Hopefully that's not going to be too difficult. First step, let's get this battery tray out of the way and see what we're working with. Now, speaking of the battery, we do get a nice 5,000 milliamp hour 3-cell LiPo with this. It's a soft pack and it's rated for 30C. Let's see just how high quality this battery is with the LiPo dyno. We can see we've got 3.8 volts for storage. It's set for 5,000 milliamp hours, and we're getting a true 19C here. I think that's pretty impressive for an included battery and should be just fine for this stock system. Anybody that's been in this hobby for a while will know that the plastics that you get kind of have a feel to them, and these plastics feel pretty high quality. Underneath the battery tray, we've got a bit of a surprise here. There's a little window you can actually view some of the shifting mechanism. I'm not sure if that's for adjusting things or what, but that's kind of neat. You can also see we've got a servo for shifting and a servo for 4 and 2-wheel drive selection, and that's going to be controlled by this really nice 8-channel Rlaarlo transmitter. I've got a couple really important things to tell you about this. First, it says in the manual, and in my experience as well, AA batteries aren't going to work with this transmitter, so you're either going to need a 2S LiPo battery or a 3.7 volt 18650 battery. Another important thing is that in this manual, they have a whole bunch of really nice information about the car, the transmitter, setting it up and everything, but what they don't have is any information on which buttons do what for the car. So let me explain. The A and C buttons are for your lockers. The B button controls the lighting. SWA is high and low speed, and SWB is front wheel drive, all-wheel drive, and rear wheel drive. It probably would have been nice if they'd have put that in the manual. The removal of these center modules in a crawler is never a simple task, but I want to see inside, so let's do it anyway. I appreciate these zip ties as cable organization. The only thing I don't like is that if you want to get into it, you've got to take all these cable ties off, and then you've got to put a bunch back on. I'd rather see integrated cable organization that's reusable. Now, since this is the first time that I've ever taken this thing apart, and probably the first time that anybody outside Rlaarlo has ever taken this thing apart, there's a good chance I'm not doing it the most efficient way possible. That being said, if you're enjoying these deep dive teardowns, make sure you get subscribed because we've got a bunch more coming and you're not going to want to miss them. Okay, after a few false starts, I think we got this thing figured out. Basically, once you get some things cleared away from the top, we've got 3 screws on either side, and then just 2 screws on the bottom skid plate, and this should pull right out. That's actually a lot more straightforward than some other crawlers that I've worked on. First thing I want to mention is this motor is an absolute beast. This is definitely the beefiest motor I've ever seen in an RC car. It has real bearings in it, real replaceable brushes, and it's just a complete monster. To adjust mesh, we've got a little cover that comes off here, and then we've just got 2 screws in slots. These screws require a 3mm bit, so to do everything on this truck, you're gonna need 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3mm bits. Okay guys, my driver finally met its match. I have never had a screw that would not come out with this driver, but watch this. So these are very heavily Loctited in, unfortunately. Let's see if this one's the same. Yep. So to get these out, we're going to need some heat, and the best thing to do to apply heat is a soldering iron. This gives you a way to apply really focused heat so you don't ruin anything around the screw, and should get that thread locker softened up in about 30 seconds. All right, let's try that again. There we go, guys. Now you're going to need heat and some serious tools to remove these screws, so be really careful if you want to take this motor out. Let's see if we get lucky a second time. There we go. A note to Rlaarlo, you don't need thread lock quite that strong. And now we've got this big beefy motor off of here. You can see we've got a couple different motor mounting options, which is really nice to see. I'm assuming these screws are going to be just as hard to take out, but we'll deal with that in the next video. Removing the motor mount plate, we can see we have a steel spur gear here that is actually supported on both sides with bearings, which is really nice. And like I said before, this is adjustable externally. It appears as though this transmission is going to come apart longitudinally in sections. Now this is going to be another thing that might not be for the faint of heart. Sometimes these things come apart and are really hard to get back together, but I still want to see what's inside. This rear end should be essentially the transfer case portion of the transmission. Hope I don't get a face full of gears here. Okay, so far these all appear to be CNC machined gears, and as expected, the shifting mechanism is made from sintered steel. So far, no plastic in here though. Okay, that took me almost 15 minutes to get back together, and I'm honestly not sure it's right. We're just gonna have to wait till after this thing's all the way back together to find out. I did notice that the front and rear drive shafts are counter-rotating. That basically eliminates torque roll on the body and is a really nice feature. And I hope you guys don't mind, but I'm not gonna take this next section apart. It's just more gears and selectors. I expect them to look exactly the same as these gears did, and I'm afraid I'll never get it back together again. So again, if you don't need to take these things apart, I'd recommend not doing so. I did want to take a closer look at these center drive shafts. These things are steel, they're super beefy, and I don't think these things are ever going to fail. I'm gonna go ahead and get all this put back together, and then let's take this thing for a spin. All right, guys, she's all back together. Now, before we take her out, there's one more thing I want to do, and that's install this accessory skid plate set with front, center, and rear skid plates. Okay, first thing, let's check out the lighting. This is the default with just the marker lights on. Then we get low beams, high beams, fog lights, light bars, unicorn party light bars, police light bars, seizure light bars, RGB light bars, and back off again. We also have left and right turn signals with sequentials in the fenders. And of course, we get lights in the rear with brake lights and reverse lights. Now let's do the ramp test. This is low speed, all-wheel drive, both diffs lock. Most cars can make it just barely to the top. She's got pretty nice control. And yeah, that's about what I would expect. Let's see that one more time. Just about to the top before she wants to fall over. Let's check its tightest turning circle. This is going to be front wheel drive only. That's pretty okay, but not nearly as good as if it actually had front dig. Let's see how it does with low speed control. Okay, yeah, she can definitely crawl. That low speed control feels really good with this brushed motor. Okay, let's check out top speed. That is about maxed out. Let's see how fast it's going. Okay, 8 miles an hour. That's not too terrible, but make sure you stay tuned for the next video because we're going to be making this thing go a lot faster. Let's go bash. Okay guys, so what do I think about the MK-07? First of all, I want to say this is a pretty cool truck. It handles very well off-road for the kind of bashing I was doing with it. It's big, it looks realistic, it's got awesome lights, but there are some rough edges on it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. First, let's talk about the price. Based on what I'm seeing online, this is going to be about $710 for the brushed version and about $850 for the brushless version. But Rlaarlo is not going to be selling them for that price. They're going to be introducing these things at $500, and to be honest with you, at $500, this is kind of a no-brainer. That's the same price you're going to pay for a TRX4, and you get a lot more truck for your money here. At that $700 price point, I had a couple of concerns about things like parts availability, how the transmitter is configured, and a few nitpicks about the truck itself, but at $500, that all kind of goes away, and honestly, I would say, if you think this thing is cool, I would just go ahead and pick one up, because it's a lot of truck, it's a lot of fun, I think you'll have a lot of fun with it, and I think you'll have a lot of fun checking out one of these videos.